न स्नानं न विलेपनं न कुस्मं न आलङ्कृता मूर्धजाः वानरेङ्का समलङ्करोति कुस्मं या संस्कृता धार्यते क्लियन्ते खलु भूषणादि सततं वाक्भूषणं भूषणम्. Quickly it says, bracelets do not decorate a person, nor do necklaces or any ornaments, but it's indeed the speech that's a real ornament. It's the dialogue that makes the difference. So as we proceed towards our next session on soft power diplomacy, I felt this is an apt thing to quote. Thank you. So now we proceed to the dialogue 3 of today's session, soft power diplomacy and higher education. This dialogue 3 will focus on deliberations in terms of internationalization of higher education and how it can strengthen India's stand as a soft power and how it can be leveraged as a useful tool for economic diplomacy. Now I invite Professor Ashwini Chhatre, Associate Professor and Academic Director, Bharti Institute of Public Policy, Indian School of Business; Kiran Rake, Minister Counselor, Political and Press, British High Commission; Nitin Pai, Co-founder and Director of Takshashila Institution; Professor M.V. Rajiv Gowda, Honorable Member of Parliament; Ms. Ruchita Divakar, Nutrition and Exercise Science Expert. Ease of global travel, the rise of social media, and an empowered diaspora have helped project India's rich cultural and constitutional heritage, making India a major soft power state in the world. Various facets of soft power like Bollywood, TV serials, yoga, Ayurveda, political pluralism, and religious diversity have facilitated in their significant way in India's economic engagement with the rest of the world and also opened up new opportunities for Indian businesses. Cultural affinity plays a significant role in gaining trust and clinching trade and investment deals. Soft power and economic diplomacy go hand in hand. For businesses and policymakers need to pay more attention to these aspects. An agenda that calls for focused deliberations in this context is the internationalization of higher education and how it can strengthen India's stand as a soft power and how it can be leveraged as a useful tool of economic diplomacy. I request Professor Ashwini Chhatre to take over. Thanks.
I am very happy to be chairing this session. I look forward first to hearing from panelists who represent a diversity of experiences, expertise, and I expect opinion. I will just frame the topic a little bit, especially because soft power in and of itself is somewhat of a many splendored thing. It depends on how you define it, and as a corollary to that, I also request the panelists to dwell on what they mean when they say soft power and when they hear soft power for a minute or so that we can also understand the diversity in which we look at soft power and its effects itself. The overall context is the use of soft power for higher education, and the context is the growing internationalization not only of India but specifically its higher education sector. A lot of it is aspirational, and it's more desire and ambition than facts on the ground. But what remains to be seen is the way in which what we understand India's soft power to be can and will be used to internationalize the higher education sector in India. So, what I bring to this is a series of questions that I will pose to panelists. I will request each one of them to spend no more than 5 minutes in sharing initial thoughts on the broad topic, drawing on their background, experience, and expertise, so that we can have enough time left in the session itself to take a round or two of questions from the audience. I would like the panelists to be as brief and succinct as possible, and I would like people in the audience to be as precise as possible in their comments or questions. So I will stop there, and I will start not necessarily in any linear sequence. I would like to first introduce Rajiv Gowda, a current member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha, former academic, many years of experience of learning and teaching public policy in the US and in India, and for several years now an active practitioner of public policy. So the annals of soft power and higher education, and I would like to request Rajiv to share his thoughts based on this diversity of experiences.
Thanks, Ashwini, and good afternoon. If you hear the brand names, Harvard, Oxford, etc., right there, you've got a sense of what Western soft power is all about in the field of higher education. And in 1984, when I went to the US, at that time, there was exactly one book in the British Library on US universities. And the soft power that drew me was just 2 or 3 phrases. I said, okay, I want to get the best possible education in the world in public policy, which is the direction I was going in economics and policy. And the heuristics were, oh, I should go to an Ivy League school and study with a Nobel laureate. Somehow I managed to pull that off, but the basic thing is we didn't have more information at that time. This is pre-internet, but that was the attraction. Now, what's there in India that would get people to come here as well? You know, with that same kind of inspiration, attraction, etc. Now, the truth of the matter is that we actually have tremendous potential. I mean, this goes for India as a whole, but especially for the higher education sector as well. In the early 2000s, I wrote an article in the New Indian Express. They wanted a vision of the future kind of thing. And I wrote an article called Vishwavidyalaya, where I said, this is the word we use for university, which can easily mean the education hub of the world, right? And what's preventing us? Where we, you know, ISB, IIM, Bangalore, where I used to teach, these are all world-class management schools, and which provide the education at a very low cost compared to the rest of the world. What's preventing us from opening our doors to the entire world and getting a very, very different set of class students in the class than what we actually have, right? So these were all just some of the questions that we raised. The other part, of course, is the research dimension of life. See, China has managed to really invest so much in its higher education, bring back some of its best talent from around the world, that it's able to now compete when it comes to patents and innovation and things like that with the best of the rest. While we have not been able to, you know, get up to that level at all. And the fact of the matter is, if you actually think about the issues that are out there in India, the problems that we face, the diseases that we have, whatever, yeah, it's ripe for all kinds of researchers to come here and work, etc. The difference is, you know, when I wanted to go to the US, there was a process, there were scholarships, we were absorbed into the higher education process very, very easily, and then absorbed into the higher education, you might say, industry as the professor without anyone batting an eyelid that you came from somewhere else. Do we open our doors in a similar manner? When we have done so historically with people from South Asia, people from Africa, etc., how do we treat them? We see violence on the streets, racism, you know, things like that instead. And certainly, we would have a little bit of a rebellion in every one of the government-funded institutions, or maybe private ones as well, if you reserved half the class for people from abroad. Okay. We in IIM used to have an exchange semester, and I used to teach a course called Understanding India in Bangalore, where my class was 100 students who were all from outside. Okay, so that sort of thing. Because for them, the attraction was, this is a growing economy. The best way to get a sense of India is to immerse yourself in it, you know, to sort of live, breathe, eat, you know, travel, experience the whole economy. So these were some of the factors that really come to mind. We do have already quite a bit of, you know, in Mysore, where some of the yoga schools have been in place for a long time. Nobody needs to sell India or its historic soft power in that sense. People are coming from all over the world just to experience what that has to offer. So essentially, if you think about what it would take, I think that we have huge possibilities, huge potential, but it would take the government to change the rules dramatically, to create all kinds of other visa and other mechanisms that will allow people to stay here and work and move on. Right? I mean, is there some clamor for the equivalent of an H1 program in India? We don't really have something like that. Why not? Right? When this is a growing economy, when we could easily have people come, study, live, work, etc. So I'll stop right here. I'm just saying that the possibilities are endless. The barriers are also enormous, but it doesn't. We put it on the table today, and I think it doesn't take too much for us to actually take the ideas that we've just raised and find ways to sort of get rid of them. Otherwise, there's a lot of rhetoric, but I haven't seen that kind of action as yet.
Thank you very much. If I may paraphrase, there is great opportunity. It is perhaps the best place to study solutions for the malaria problem that will be applicable for everywhere else, because India presents the microcosm and has the technical capability to do that. But the challenges are in attracting talent to attack that problem in a way that is not restricted by borders or the red tape and the bureaucracy. So that is where the gap is. And I really like your characterization of Vishwavidyalaya. I definitely never thought about it. But the word itself encompasses a universality. That university, the word also, the root of the word university also comes from. And while we aspire to it, this is the rhetoric, we have never really put our mind to doing that.
Just one more example. Take medical education. A resident or a student in America or from some other part of the world, if they were to come to India, in one semester's immersion, they would get more exposure and training than they would get in 20 years there. Just the complexities and the diversities of diseases and whatever else. And we could certainly send them to the rural parts that are underserved, if nothing else.
So, which brings me to the diplomacy part of the soft power and higher education conundrum, which is where the soft power sort of derives from a broader set of processes, the eat, pray, love school of thought, I guess, which then has to be backed up with concrete efforts to sort of make sure that it works in ways that benefit the country. I would like to invite next Kieran Drake, the Minister Counselor at the British High Commission and the person in charge of political and press networks, and almost 2.5 years in India now with a fair bit of experience before that. And I would like to call upon Kieran to share his thoughts on the role of diplomacy in this soft power higher education conundrum.
Thank you.
Kieran.
Thank you, Ashwini, and it's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon. You started off by asking us a bit about how we saw soft power, and for me it's really within that classic power dynamic. If power is about how do you get someone to do something, then hard power is about coercion, and soft power really is about attraction. And as Rajiv was saying, the attraction of Ivy League education in the US, it was that power of attraction, the power of the reputation.
Well, Oxford too.
And Oxford. I was being modest in that, but the power of attraction of world-class universities overseas that drew him from India to study abroad. So really for me, soft power is about our values, our culture, our language, our education, of course, as well, and how we use those to attract people, to encourage them to behave in certain ways or to do certain things. Now, a lot of that is based on perceptions and preconceptions. So I wonder, when you all think about the UK, I wonder what comes first to your mind. I suspect that for many people it will be the English language. For some people, it'll be about history, about the royal family. Maybe it'll be about education and the higher education institutions. But soft power can be rooted in so many different sources, different places. And I would say, really for me, there are two things when we're talking about the role of government in that. So clearly, if you're thinking about tourism, if you're thinking about sport, if you're thinking about culture, if you're thinking about language, a lot of that exists outside of government. But you've asked me, what is the role of diplomacy? What's the role in government in that? And I'd say there are two things. The first thing is an understanding that soft power, and I know there's some disagreement on the panel about this, but for me, soft power is not nebulous. It's sometimes considered to be entirely nebulous, but it has clear and quantifiable benefits, and that's why every government around the world engages in soft power. Now, often those benefits can be economic, but they're very real. But the second thing is that it takes time. Soft power is not a quick tool of government. And the third thing, which links to that, is it's rarely something that's done directly by government. Indeed, as soon as I think government starts doing something directly, it loses its value as soft power. What governments can do is create the opportunities for soft power to flourish, for cultures to flourish. I'll give you two examples. If you look at the UK, one of the things that many of you might think about is the film industry or literature. You know, think about Harry Potter, Sherlock Holmes, some of those UK cultural icons that people encourage people to come to the UK, to study there, to read about it, to watch films about it. Now, the UK government has put an enormous amount of money into creating the conditions in which our film industry will flourish. We don't write the books, we don't make the films, but we create the circumstances for that to succeed. Contrast that to other countries, maybe where they have a more repressive regime, where censorship exists. And I think you'll see quite a difference in the way that soft power is used. Just very briefly on education, again, this is not new. I think it is something that the UK government does very effectively, but it's not new. So the Romans, when they conquered a new part of Europe, would typically take the sons of the conquered chieftain and bring them back to Rome and educate them there. Because they knew that if you won the hearts, the minds of the next generation, extending your power was so much easier. And of course, I say all governments try and do this, both through ensuring that your institutions have that quality of attraction. So in the UK, we have four out of the top 20 universities in the world are UK institutions, 30 out of the top 200. 12% of all global students come to the UK. Last year, we had almost 22,000 Indian students coming to the UK, which is more than 40% more than the year before. It's not enough, we'd love more, but it's been going up steadily for the last 3 or 4 years. But we also put a lot of money into that. So last year, we spent over $5 million on scholarships for Indian students alone to come and study in the UK. And it works. So Chevening, our biggest scholarship program, you've got 14 heads of government around the world who were educated in the UK through the Chevening program. So again, it's something that government can do indirectly as well as directly. The last thing I'd say, though, again, it goes back to that point about its attraction. That isn't something that we do, that we can impose on anyone else. And one of the things that I think is most special about the soft power relationship between the UK and India is the dialogue that exists there. We were talking about it over lunch. The national dish in the UK now is chicken tikka masala, made in India, made in the UK, inspired by India, and cherished, I think, in both countries now. You know, we have a diaspora of 1.5 million people of Indian origin living in the UK, contributing to all walks of life, whether that's politics, science, research, education, medicine, and that's, again, it's not a static thing. It's a constant flow. So we had 1.4 million passengers last year on flights traveling between the UK and India, which is about 4,000 people a day on 16 flights a day. So that living bridge that exists is constant. We had around 100,000 people from India travel to the UK just this summer to watch the Cricket World Cup. We might come back to sport later, I'll stop there, but that again is another form of soft power and another form of attraction.
And of course, the English Premier League.
Of course.
it's something that I wanted to bring up in the context of moving forward. So there is diplomacy that is largely in the hands of state agencies and state actors, and there is soft power that this diplomacy can use to attract students. But soft power itself has multiple dimensions that are not always in the control of state actors, or at least do not provide sufficient opportunity. I'm reminded by a talk by Chimamanda Adichie, the Nigerian author. The title of the talk related to the need for us to go beyond a single story. And it seems that for a long time, in at least certain parts of the developed world, India was a single story, that of sort of snake charmers and rope and ladders and so on. And it appears, and I wonder for the panelists, if there is now a multi-dimensional India story emerging on world stage that relates to the power of yoga, that relates to the power of spirituality, well-being, healing, nutrition, diets that are uniquely Indian, perhaps not very narrowly geographically specified, but creating an image of India that goes way, way, way beyond the snake charmer image that came to mind 50 years ago. Now, that expansion, that multidimensionality of the soft power that India has is a new phenomena, and it is not something that is adequately reflected in higher education, though it's beginning to show itself in diplomatic efforts, such as the International Yoga Day, for example. I would like to introduce our next speaker and invite her to share her thoughts on this new phenomena. Rujuta Divekar, sports medicine expert, passionate about public health, and frequent commentator on this conundrum. Rujuta.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. In fact, I was wondering what am I doing at an event like this, because this is much more intellectual than what I'm typically used to. You know, mostly I talk about food and weight loss, and talking about soft power, I think, you know, when Sir was studying in 1984, obviously it was a very different world. But by the time I turned into a professional from 2011 itself, what I have seen is invitations from different countries, especially our neighbors, you know, whether it's China or Nepal or, you know, inviting me to, and now even very recently Afghanistan, to come and talk about Indian wisdom about well-being. You can also see now with, just like there is soft power, I think there are also some hard threats that the world faces in terms of climate change. And one of the unique things that India has to offer is what is now very popular on social media in the form of #PlantProtein. And I guess even Mahatma Gandhi is one of India's biggest soft powers in that sense. And when the Indian government celebrated Bapu at 150, I think that's how, you know, even in a place like Afghanistan, they wanted to know that how can you have a vegetarian diet and live a perfectly healthy life. And for me, it was really interesting because I went there around Nowroz, which is one of the biggest festivals in Afghanistan. They celebrated with around 7 dishes, and all of them were vegetarian in nature. You know, so thank you. So I think soft power, like Sir rightly mentioned, is also a lot about give and take. It's a lot about dialogue. It's not about you going and imposing something, but you also learning that so much is common. And I was just saying to him at lunch that sometimes what happens to us as Indians is that we want our traditional wisdom to get some kind of recognition, or maybe an article in NYT or Washington Post or The Guardian, so that we can say, हाँ चलो हल्दी दूध पी सकते हैं, because everyone is drinking turmeric latte for £2 in the UK. I guess that is something that we need to look at internally, even when we talk about what soft power can do outside in terms of diplomacy. But because you wanted the focus to be on higher education, I just want to say this, that one of the drivers who picked me up at Kabul, and you know, he was a local Afghanistan person, and he said to me that, "Acha, aap Hindi se ho? You know, you're from India?" And I said, "Yes." So he said, "India हमको बहुत अच्छा लगता है. India हमको बुक देता है, पाकिस्तान हमको बंदूक देता है." And you know, so I almost felt that maybe he was planted by someone in the Indian government, because, you know, why is he talking? But when it comes to soft power, I think education has a big role to play. My first time at ISB was also for this event called Chai and Why, and now we do know that Chai is across the globe. It is also one of our soft powers. But the one thing why even ISB invited me here, and this may be a little off the topic from soft power, is you know, when students come to ISB and they sign up for this year-long or 2-year-long course, they wanted me here to talk about what can they do in terms of staying fit, because I guess everyone studies late in the night and gains weight. I guess one of the places where an institute like ISB could garner soft power is to at least have an elective subject on a very India-specific outlook on food, well-being, and yoga. And I'm sure it is something which will surely help the students who are currently studying, and it will also attract students across the globe if there's an institution like yours which is offering something in a more formal way than I guess what Mysore offers. So I think that's my 2 bits on soft power diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, it only illustrates the myriad and interesting ways in which soft power works, and the ways in which it continues to surprise us. I also want to take this opportunity to bring attention to, I mean, not its downside, but let's say the flip side. This is the extent to which the presence of chai latte on Starbucks menus is actually soft power is a matter of debate. It is definitely instrumental because there is recognition. It's something that is good for you. It's better than coffee. I mean, I'm doubtful about that, but certainly there is an sort of underlying series of layers about well-being itself that is manufactured, literally. And in the age of fake news and more intellectually in the age of post-truth, the degree to which soft power actually works for you is definitely a matter of debate, if not a matter of conjecture. So I want to take this opportunity to bring a somewhat more critical focus to the way in which we think about and understand soft power. And I would like to introduce Nitin Pai, the co-founder and current director of Takshashila Institution, and several years of experience of not only in teaching students, but also helping them think about many of these aspects. Nitin, please.
Thank you, Ashwini. I thought I'm going to disagree with you only on one point, but now there's a second one. I mean, how could you say that tea is better than coffee? I'm from Karnataka. There are 2 of us here. We grow the best coffee in the world, right? And we distribute the best coffee in the world. So I think even empirically, I mean, if you look at enough of the research papers of the right kind written by Karnataka people, you will find that coffee is a better drink to have than tea.
Sorry, but I think soft power would mean then bringing a cup of coffee for all of us.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Okay,
Right?
Andhra has Araku coffee.
Oh, Araku
which is also
coffee,
very
yes,
good.
which is come. So, you know, one of the things when people talk about soft power is, I'm going to make this little thing first before I tell you a story, is that people get overly excited about soft power because it seems, you know, to ordinary people, you know, if you were to say that India has nuclear weapons, we have aircraft carriers which can project power into the shores of Africa, to the South China Sea, it makes a lot of people queasy, you know, muscular power, you know, we don't flex military power. Why don't we talk about soft power, you know, the soft things that we do. You know, we have Bollywood, we have yoga, you have chicken tikka masala or Indian food, or you know, these are the kind of things that we're going to use to project Indian power across the world, right? It makes people feel better that the soft power is something nice that we do. We are nice people, therefore we do nice things in foreign affairs. You know, that's a convenient myth people like to have when it comes to foreign policy. International relations doesn't work on niceness, right? It doesn't work on you know, being good and nice and lofty-softy and fuzzy and all of that. There is a hard edge to international relations, which is carried out by diplomats. So even people here who carry the title of economic diplomat or a public diplomat, whatever, ultimately have to practice their trade at the sharp end of international relations, where power comes into being. So just because people watch your movies, people eat your food, people listen to the same music as you do, people probably speak the language as you do, it doesn't mean that their governments are going to align to your national interests. Getting the governments to align to your national interests is what diplomacy is about. So I would distinguish this warm fuzzy conversation about soft power from the practical, functional art and skill of diplomacy, of which public diplomacy, economic diplomacy, political diplomacy, all of that have a role, right? So I don't want to belabor this point, but I just want to bring out to this point that, look, let's not get overly excited about soft power. It has certain roles. Maybe two civilizations can have mutual affinities for each other, and that's a good thing. But whether these affinities translate into real foreign policy decisions that promote interests is a debatable topic. So we've been talking about connecting soft power, diplomacy and higher education as a theme of this. So let me just take you to a different era, right? The year 640 AD, right? Roughly 638 AD is when this Chinese pilgrim slash student who read the prospectus comes to India to pick up Buddhist sutras. There is Yuanzhang, right? Yuanzhang comes, his emperor tells him not to go, don't leave the Middle Kingdom, but he escapes in the night, takes a long route through Afghanistan, etc., comes to India, lives here for many, many years, 10 or 15 years. And, you know, he studies at Nalanda, he studies at other institutions, higher educational institutions in India. He's so impressed, and he takes back some of these things back with him, and he goes back. So when he goes back, he goes to the Chinese emperor and says that, look, India is this wonderful place, I lived there, they have, you know, they have sophisticated higher education, so on and so forth. And because of this, embassies are exchanged between Emperor Harsha and Tang Taizong of China, right? So Harsha, I think, sends 3 embassies, the Chinese emperor sends back 1. And among the things that are exchanged at that time is technology to produce sugar, which India had and the Chinese needed, and an Ayurvedic doctor called Narayan Swami, who was sent from India to China to teach the Chinese Ayurvedic medicine, right? So that's the nice part of it. Now, what goes unsaid in this story, very few people know this story, but the second part of this story is quite interesting. This reveals the need for us to have hard understanding of foreign policy. The Chinese system recognizes only one sovereign, right? The Middle Kingdom and the Emperor of China is the only sovereign in the world, right? Everybody else is a tributary. You go and kowtow to the emperor and say that, look, you know, I've got gifts for you, I've got tribute for you. So he understands only a tributary system. The Indian system, on the other hand, understood multiple sovereignties. So you could have a king of this state and a king of that state, king of Videsha, king of Vidarbha, king of Magadha and all of that. So, you know, kings knew that there were other kings, but the Chinese emperor did not recognize any other king. So when the Chinese emperor sent down an embassy through the Himalayas to what is currently Uttar Pradesh, those guys got molested, right? So, various things were happening in Uttar Pradesh, and they sort of beat up this embassy. And the Chinese emperor took this as an insult to the only sovereign in the world, right? So how could you molest my embassy? So they formed a coalition of Tibetan horsemen and Nepalese infantrymen, came down the hills, attacked India, and killed 10,000 people on the banks of the river Ganges. And the Indian records have no mention of this, okay? So we've forgotten about this completely. But the Chinese record says that 10,000 people were killed and their bodies were thrown into the river, and the river became red, right? So this is the other side, that you might trigger off something using soft power, but the consequences of that will be felt in many other dimensions which you might not have the ability to appreciate. Now, in the current context, I think Rajiv mentioned it, that we have scholarships for many people from many countries, right? They come to India, they study, but if they encounter reality that is not to the expectation, that does not match the brand promise of what India is, it goes back and it has negative repercussions. So there are countries which I know which have very favorable impressions of India, right? If you go to Malaysia, Malaysian patients, Malaysian people have great ideas of what India is because of Manipal and the medical education. Many of the Malaysian doctors were trained in Manipal. You go to the Maldives, a lot of people have very favorable views of Bangalore and Thiruvananthapuram because a lot of them studied in these places. But you go further afield, right? If you talk to many Africans or some Southeast Asians or our neighbors from the subcontinent, you will get a very different view of what it is, and it influences it. Coupled with the fact that we are very, very terrible at talent management, right? We're very terrible at I think India's instinctive response to talent is to push it away, right? We just go away, right? And we don't have a database of who these people are, what are they good at, how can they be counted upon in times of need and so forth. So I would just end by saying that while soft power and the idea of India, the wonderful things that the country can provide, creates a brilliant prospectus and a brand image for the country, the agency is upon the government and the people, educational institutions, to make that brand reality happen. Otherwise, we'll end up in situations which we didn't bargain for.
Thank you, Nitin. This provocation must be responded. Right? Kiran, Rajiv, you go first.
No, I just wanted to take him on the higher education front, right? If India got its act together, if we made the scholarships available, if we allowed people to come here, study here, work here, etc., and we supported our institutions such that we provided this high quality education at a very low cost, right? The economics of it would be the hard part. The UK university system would shut down because everyone would be flocking to India instead at a fraction of the price, right? So that's what I'm trying to say, that we just haven't even thought about this. Forget, act on it at all. And part of it is because we have such a lot of pressure internally to accommodate the competition that's here that we can't easily open our doors to the rest of the world. And it's not like the rest of the world doesn't have competition. They value money that we put in. There are a few $1 billion that goes out of India every year in tuition fees. And, but also, they value the fact that that multicultural environment in the classroom is actually part of the whole learning process itself. And so that, and then of course America has had this sort of black hole effect for talent from everywhere and sucks it in and makes it its own. It goes, I think back to the 1984 visa interview, and the big question used to be, tell me that why you're going to go back to India. I think that was just a red herring. They wanted to see whether you were smart enough to absorb into America. And getting out of there is very, very difficult. It's a few of us who managed to escape the magnetic pull of that larger ecosystem.
Kiran?
Sure. So I don't disagree with everything that Nitin said, in that clearly hard power matters, and that's why governments invest in a military as well. And the UK has its commitments and it has its memberships of NATO and other organisations like that. I'm one of the P5 in the Security Council. So of course governments need hard power, and you need that both for defence primarily, but also for other purposes. But where I disagree with you is saying that then makes soft power irrelevant. And I say that for two reasons. One, where I started in my remarks earlier, that there are clear quantifiable benefits to soft power. Two examples, one direct government, one outside government. So on the direct government side, we run a campaign in the UK called GREAT. If you've flown into a UK airport, you will see posters advertising, promoting the UK using the slogan, Great Britain. That is now one of the top 50 most valuable brands in the UK. It's shown to have had a return on investment, that advertising campaign, of more than 20 to 1. We know that money that we spend promoting the UK overseas through our culture, through our history, through our contemporary societal assets, through sport, generates a return on investment. So it brings money in, and you'll have seen that. You talked about the EPL. You see it through the Cricket World Cup. More than 10% of jobs in the UK come from tourism. Most tourists come to the UK from overseas. So there is an immediate economic value. But secondly, and this is my point about soft power being long-term or multi-generational, not by encouraging people to spend time in other countries, or in our case, to come to the UK, to study there, to live there, to go on holiday there, we know that they're much more likely to think favourably about the UK, to want to do business there, to want to invest there. And I don't have the data to back it up, but I would suggest that the better we know each other as well, and your story sort of exemplifies this with the difference of opinion about the nature of sovereignty, but the more we understand each other, the less likely we are to have conflict. So in terms of immediate financial return, in terms of long-term economic benefits, and in terms of actually peace, harmony, the less of a need to rely on hard power, soft power all has a value. And the last thing I'd say is that the hard power argument is about government to government fundamentally. And what we're mainly talking about here, I think, is about soft power and the relationships between people. So, India's diaspora around the world has a huge impact on how people around the world see India. The number of Indians in the UK strengthens that connection between our two countries. The fact that we have Indian origin cricketers, Nasir Hussain captain the England cricket team, we have leading doctors, leading scientists, that affects how people see each other's countries and affects the type of relationship that we can have. One of the previous sessions talked about most businesses in India being family-run businesses. Actually, if you think about this as a global family, and the more connections we have, the more we can do together, not just in terms of sort of traditional economic business, but the more dialogue, the more exchange, the more contact. And I think that is the route to a better future. And so I'd say don't see it in terms of zero-sum games. Don't see it as a binary, it's either hard power or soft power. I think there's room for both.
We have time for a round of questions. I would like, if I can see you, a round of questions. We'll take a few from different parts of the audience. I can't because this is glaring into my eyes. Why don't you go first?
Thank you for the...
Could you also please introduce yourself briefly?
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Pradeep. I have two questions. I'll be very brief. One is on the medical students going to China to study. And as Mr. Gowda was saying that India has a wonderful experience, provides all these things, then it's an insult for Indian students to go to China and study. Second is about international students studying in India. Out of 5 million international students, 10% go to China. 1% come to India. I have interacted with students, African students in China, and they said, we have studied in India also, and one guy has studied from Hyderabad. He said, living in India is like living in a family of our own. Whereas in China, they are restricted.
You need to
in
rush up
many
your
ways.
question.
Yeah,
We don't
that's
have
all.
enough time.
It's restricted.
What is the question?
Yeah, the question is, India, in the eyes of people, students, it's very good, but we don't seem to be promoting it. Whereas China is promoting with its Belt and Road, with the China scholarships, with Confucius Institute, all this is happening, but India is not doing anything.
Thank you very much. This is exactly what Rajiv has said already. This gentleman in the middle, yes. We'll take a round of questions and then ask the panelists to respond. Please introduce yourself and keep it brief.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Colonel Mishra from the Indian Army, a serving officer and a student of mass communication in Hyderabad. My question is regarding the soft power and higher education. Normally, soft power is used by any country to extend its foreign policy rather than going for the military option. It wants to contain rather than to go for an aggression. And somehow we are talking here that political system is different and a soft diplomacy moves separately, parallel to each other and don't merge into each other. I have the opinion that soft power is actually used by every government. You see what happened in '87. General Ziaul Haq came from Pakistan to India for the cricket diplomacy when we were on brass tracks and they were on Jabre Moin. So did Musharraf also appreciate Dhoni during the match there. So I think soft power is a tool used by any nation to forge friendship, and it is a country which allows higher education also. If there's a crackdown by the government, if there is no concessions, you won't have an higher education, you won't have exchange of education per se. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Someone from this? Yes, please. Yes.
Sir, I'm Balda Ashok. I'm a retired Assistant General Manager from State Bank of India. My question is in the higher education. Our people are held in high esteem. When you are outside the country, we are known for our wisdom and knowledge, and we are transforming and then exchanging our knowledge. How is that we are unable to attract the people from outside the country when we have a great culture and the great wisdom here? I would focus, or I would point out this question to Mr. Honorable Member of Parliament.
Thank you very much. We'll take one more question towards the back. Can't see at all. Yes, over there, right on the back. Yes.
When it comes to soft power, what was talked about earlier and even now.
Can't hear you, and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sriram. I'm a research scholar in IIT Hyderabad. When we talked about soft power, a loose definition that was given is culture, cuisine and cinema. But when you look at India, when we look at our own literature, this country until the last couple of years did not have a department of Indology, though countries world over have had that department. That's one example of how we don't look at our own strengths in terms of civilizational knowledge and stuff. So how do we use that?
Can you say that again? What department of what?
Indology.
Indology.
This whole country as a civilization, we did not have a single department of Indology for ourselves. Whereas world over, there have been departments. So we don't prize our own thing. How are we supposed to be going out and using soft power?
Okay. Any responses?
Been a couple of questions directed to me, so let me just go ahead.
Please.
First, on the last point, I'm not sure about with the veracity of no Indology departments. We've had our Bhandarkar Oriental Institutes, lots of institutions studying India, Indian culture, Indian history, heritage, etc. So I'm not sure that you had to have a department with that exact title. There may have been enough, may not have been enough, but there was some amount of attention to the larger topic. Now, the other issue about, why are students going to China to study medicine? That's because we have fewer seats available here. People go to Russia, people go to the Caribbean, they go wherever they can go and get a degree. Now, that is not a commentary on whether we are deficient versus others being better or anything like that. It's just that we don't have enough seats for the number of people who aspire for medical colleges. Now, the other side is about what allowed Malaysians, for example, to engage with us. An institution like Manipal, which was, in some sense a privately developed institution, opened its doors to lots of students from around the world. NRIs started coming to private institutions in Bangalore. So these became both revenue streams, but also it made it easier for people to come and get a quality education while paying enough money that allowed cross-subsidization of everything else and growth, etc., and the building of a brand name. So that's something that government-run institutions have historically not done in any aggressive manner. Okay? And part of the reason is, as I mentioned, that we are catering to our own population first, and we haven't imagined that we could really open doors in a manner that would entail, even at IIM where I used to teach, when we started to open our doors to people from outside, we had to first make the decision to accept the GMAT along with, as an alternative to the CAT. Okay? Otherwise, before we were very rigid. There's only one exam you take, and the grades won't even carry over beyond that 1 year you took the exam. All kinds of restrictions. So you actually have to create a whole ecosystem to make it easy for people to come and work with you and live here and work here, etc. And we are nowhere close to that. Now there is talk about policy changes that will allow Indians overseas coming back here and working for a few years, will allow foreigners to come and work here for a few years. This is all at the faculty level, and I'm not sure enough is done at the student level. But then there's nothing coming in the way of our own institutions being innovative and entrepreneurial. ISB is an example of an institution that just broke the mold. I mean, technically, the UGC never, sort of recognized a one-year MBA, and market recognized it. So it just is, probably we're in an illegal institution by the UGC standards. Okay, but the basic point is, it doesn't matter, right? And that's something that's been, that other places are doing. And here the question arises. A lot of colleges are reaching out to foreign students. They're having twinning programs, exchange programs, etc. So you'll find this. Garden City College in Bangalore, Christ University. All of these are doing their own networking. They're building their own bridges, etc. Our worry is that, is this happening at a level that would ensure that students are not getting screwed or exploited, in terms of how much, what they're getting for their, what's being promised and what's being delivered, and things like that. So there's a lot of work we'd have to do before this whole system is cleaned up and made transparent and, and allowed to flourish in some ways. But I'm glad we're discussing and thinking about that. The point is, where the soft power for higher education would come is if the world says, that's where I want to go get my degree, right? Say ISB. And have we reached that stage yet? When that stage is reached, we have arrived.
Well, we have arrived at the end of the panel, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists and for yours. Thank you very much.
Diplomacy, who visited more than 114 countries and 700 plus football grounds, a good friend of ISB, the British Deputy High Commissioner Andrew Fleming. Please come on to the stage to give away the mementos to the speakers as a token of our gratitude. Request all the speakers and Andrew to join for the group photograph, please. Friends, let's take a quick tea break or coffee break for Nitin and others, and come back here by 4 o'clock